it's clear that the longer this impasse continues, the greater the political impact on those in Washington. Let's get more on that from CBS News political director John Dickerson in our Washington bureau. John, good morning.
Good morning, Anthony.
We heard from Jeff, John, that there's talking going on, obviously, at least we can see that, but we've kind of been in this position before. I mean, what sense of urgency is there on both sides now, do you think?
Well, there is a sense of urgency for two reasons. One, the debt ceiling is something everyone takes seriously, or at least everyone at the table. And then there's, of course, the political pressure on both sides. The big pressures on Republicans. Polls have shown the party is taking quite a hit for this government shutdown. Republicans getting a much greater share of the blame. And there's some pressure on the president. If you look at the polls, his previous stance, which was no negotiations, that was not tenable. So that's the pressure on the two sides. And they do seem to be working here. They are trading options. There are really three things in play. There's the White House, then there's the House Republicans, and then the Senate Republicans. So you've got three actors, and they do have a sense of urgency, and it does look like they will ultimately get somewhere.
John, you mentioned the Republicans are getting the greater share of the blame. So what are the long-term consequences for the party? Do we already know how people view this?
Well, in the short term, in both the Gallup poll and in the Wall Street Journal NBC poll, the Republican Party is at its lowest place in terms of people approval rating as it has ever been in the history of those two polls. So that's a terrible short-term picture. If, in fact, they can come up with some kind of an agreement here and to have longer-term budget talks, that's better ground for Republicans. That's something where some of this infighting we've seen during the government shutdown will likely go away. The topics of spending and of taxes are ones that Republicans have talked about for a long time and feel comfortable with. So that's an opportunity for Republicans to be in a more comfortable space than the one they've been in now. And perhaps these acute problems they're having now in the polls and with public opinion could drift away if that next stage of these negotiations, which may go on for a couple of months, if that's managed a little bit better.
But, John, there were a number of Republicans who, going into this whole strategy, said it was doomed to fail. So I'm wondering what now that does to the sort of balance of power within the party itself.
Right. And one of the things you're seeing now is I've been having conversations with Republican senators who, before this strategy was put in place, said it's not going to work. It's a disaster for the party. And now they're basically saying, I told you so. The challenge really is for Ted Cruz and the conservatives in the House who are pushing this and who led to this strategy. And they have stuck to their guns. But they are in a much weaker position than they were before, because the claim Ted Cruz made was that if we launch this strategy, if we press the president on defunding his health care plan, the country will rise up in support behind us. And the polls have not shown that. They've shown the opposite. In fact, there's a tiny bit of uptick in support for the Affordable Care Act after this shutdown adventure. So in the coming debates over taxes and spending, those conservative voices will probably be diminished a little bit because of the difficulty they've had with this Obamacare detour.
So if we do get a deal, if both parties or one party bends to all the polls that we're seeing, these numbers, are we really going to be in a territory that we haven't been in before?
There's not a lot of reason for optimism about any kind of long-term budget negotiations that are going to come on the heel of whatever kind of deal we get here. This summer, the White House tried through long negotiations with 8 Republican senators to try to overcome some of these questions of taxes and spending that have bedeviled the government for the last several years. And they tried it out of the spotlight. They had long, good faith meetings. And basically, those meetings broke down over the same old fault lines. Basically, the White House wants more revenue, wants something more from taxes from Republicans. Republicans want big entitlement cuts from the president. Neither side is willing to budge on those issues. And so those are the fault lines we have entering into these longer talks. There's no evidence that those fault lines have changed any, so expectations should be kept very low.
John Dickerson in Washington. Thank you, John.